everyone for being with us today, and I apologize about having to cancel last week. We were dealing with some sickness in the household and didn't sleep much the night before, and by the time Sunday morning rolled around, just didn't have the time or the energy to get everything set up. So I apologize. But we are here today, and we're going to pick up where we left off. Now, I want to give you a brief recap. We want to kind of get into this feeling. The opening treatment hopefully put us in the feeling of recognizing, remembering the growth that we're seeing around us, that which appeared dead is coming back to life. There's a renewal. Right? And we talked about that renewal as being not only a physical renewal, a renewal of the physical world, but a spiritual renewal, a renewal and a recommitment to discover our spiritual nature. We want to come and talk about what it means to begin to experience our spiritual nature, what it means to develop a spiritual practice for the purpose of discovering more and more of what our spiritual nature is. So we talked a little bit in the past few weeks, we've talked a little bit about the symbolism of the world, the mythology of the world, that there are certain seasons and certain times of the year and certain times of life that we as human beings, we just naturally seem to pause and to reflect. When a baby is born into a family, it is a joyful time, and everybody holds the little one and says, "Oh, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. This is a gift from God." Something in us that recognizes, that sees and that recognizes that there's more going on than just what appears physically, more going on than just the simple biological fact that a baby has been born. But it's tied into a deeper mystery, the deeper mystery of life. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Why are we here? What shall we do while we're here? I love Joel Goldsmith's work, and one of his my favorite books of his is called A Parenthesis in Eternity. Parentheses in Eternity. And he talks about, what is eternity? What is eternal? The eternal is without time. And Joseph Campbell kind of leans on this a little bit. We have one idea of eternity is that something just goes on forever and ever and ever, kind of like the movie Groundhog Day. You just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's the same, but it just never ends. But that which is eternal, it has no time to it. There's a sense of timelessness. There is no beginning. There is no end. There only is the eternal now, here and now. And in the divine, in the absolute, in what the philosophers would call the first cause or spirit or God, I call love. But in that experience, there's no time. There just is. So in the scriptures, we're told that God is the I am. The I am. See, anything else that we would use to define it limits it. If I say I am this, then I am not that. I have defined, I have limited. But to just say I am, the highest name for God, the I am. That I am is the I that you and I are. We don't always understand that. We don't always recognize that. We don't always act as if that were true. But it is. See, this very life that we express while we're here and that we'll express through all time, that very life is not ours. We didn't create it. We didn't make it. We didn't buy it or pay for it. It is that miracle that we recognize when the baby is born. It is the gift of God. So the true nature of our being, right? We're told in Scripture that we are created in the image and the likeness of God. That doesn't mean that we look like God, that we could look in a mirror and say, oh, God has a nose and two eyes and two ears and those sorts of things. It means we are made in its nature. We are according to its nature. We are the same stuff and substance, because when it created out of itself. So the life that we are, and the life that we are experiencing while we are here on earth, is an expression of that eternal, unlimited I am expressing itself as I. Not the ego I, not the I that I think I am, not the I that I see when I look in my driver's license, but the very life that pushes forward through us, that I. And what Goldsmith tells us is that this life that we are living here on earth is like a parenthesis in eternity. It's like we have taken this eternal timelessness, and we have put an opening bracket and a closing bracket, and we said, in here, from birth to death, in here, this parenthesis that defines this life here on earth is part of that bigger stream of life. So we start to recognize at certain times and certain events in our lives, we start to recognize that we are truly part of that we are truly part of that eternal stream. It's not just an intellectual exercise, not just a fairy tale, wouldn't it be nice if, but we truly start to sense it, to experience it, to feel it. And that's what these different times of the year, the different celebrations as we go through the year are about. When we got to Christmas, we were talking about the symbolism of Christmas. And we were talking about the fact that these stories that we read, these teaching stories that we read in scriptures of the world, right, they're not meant to be a spectator sport. They're not meant to entertain. So we sit and we watch a movie on TV, or we watch a sporting event on TV, and there's several ways that we can take it. We can view it passively, like it's on TV, but we're doing something else in the room. We've got our laptop or our tablet on our lap, and we're reading emails and doing all sorts of other things, and it's there. The TV is on, and there's this thing that's taking place, and we're just kind of every once in a while we look at it. Then another level that we can view it is we can really get engaged. We can really kind of get into it. If it's a sporting event, we might stand up and cheer for our team, or we might yell at the referee when they make a call against our team, and all these things. If there's a drama on TV, if there's a story, we might really get engaged with the characters, and at times we'll sit and we'll find ourselves laughing or crying or just really caught up in the story. We've kind of crossed some type of a boundary there. See, we're no longer a passive spectator. Now we're engaged, and now we're involved. But it's still not us living that event. We're not down on the field playing the game. We are not in the movie actually, engaged with the characters. We are still kind of participating, but only vicariously. We're participating, but it's not really happening. And then, of course, there's a third level, which would be that we actually go and we do something like that. We actually go get the soccer ball out of the garage and go kick it around the yard with the kids, or something like that. Now we're engaged. Now we're playing. And when we read the scriptures of the world, when we start to read these stories, what I'm suggesting is we have to recognize that what they're talking about is they're talking about you and I. Even though the characters have different names, they're talking about you and I. They're talking about a principle that is the very nature of you and I, because we are part of that eternity. You see, we are part of that eternal, even though we are having an experience between the bookmarks of the parentheses of the beginning and the end. It is only the beginning and the end of this experience that we have here, and only one experience of many that we have. So at Christmas time, we said the mythology, and by mythology I don't mean something that's false, right? In our common usage of mythology, we tend to dismiss things as a myth that we want to denigrate as being untrue. Oh, that's just a myth. This. You see it on the internet. The 10 myths about this, the 10 myths about that. But there's another deeper meaning of mythology, and mythology represents the stories that contain the value set for our culture, for who we are. Right? These are the teaching stories that really, if you dig down into the stories, they're telling us who we are. They're telling us what we believe. And it's very important to understand this, because most people, their values are beyond the intellect. They're beyond their ability to express them intellectually. If you go to somebody and say, well, what are your values? Yes, they're going to give you some answers. They're going to tell you, honesty and truth, and all those kind of things that they're going to blurt out, things that we learned in school. But if you observe their life, if you observe the way that they're living their life, it's going to betray or reveal their true values, how they truly feel about life, how they truly believe about life. And for most people, that is something that they can't identify. They can't put their hands on it. They don't even know, for example, why we believe the way we believe. It's just something that, the Stoic philosopher says we get our values at our mother's breast. We kind of learn them as we were growing up, as a small child, as a baby. They're kind of so deeply ingrained in us that it would be impossible for us to go back. But our mythology, the mythology that we believe to be true, as Joseph Campbell tells us, that mythology reveals to us what our values are. Now, it's easy for adherents of a particular religion to look at the mythology of another religion, a different religion, and say, well, their mythology is not true. That's only a story. But their own mythology they believe to be true, to be literally true. And this is why Campbell says the mythology we believe to be true constitutes our religion. So the teaching stories reveal to us, the teaching stories that we believe to be true reveal to us our deeper values, our deeper sense of what's important. What is really guiding us? What is giving us direction as we go through life? And they're not meant to be spectator sports. They're not meant for us to just read them as a story and say, once upon a time, a long time ago in a far, far away place. Something that we tell our children as they go to bed, And it's not even that sometimes we read them and we connect to them at an emotional level. We get engaged with them, like watching the football game and getting engaged, or watching the drama and becoming engaged. But we have to understand that what these stories are telling us is they are really revealing to us a truth about ourselves. So at Christmas time, the truth that was revealed to us about ourselves is that this idea of the Christ, this idea of where human and divine meet, is the truth of our being, the truth of everyone's being. We don't always realize it. We don't always recognize it. We don't always act as if. But if you stop and think about, where did our life come from, the thing we call our life? Where did our soul come from? What created our soul? It was the divine itself. And it created it out of itself. A little spark of the divine, the poet says, a little spark that can be desecrated but never destroyed. Right? So we don't know who we are. We don't understand who we are. We don't always act as who we are. But nevertheless, it's there. And it comes to us as a babe. It comes to us as a small child because, we're not ready to deal with it. We're not ready to handle it. It has to grow. It has to grow. It comes to us as an awakening. an aha moment. As I say, some of these moments and these seasons that we go through in life, where we hold a child in our arms, a baby just a few hours old, and there's something. We look at the seasons and there's something that reminds us, there's something that connects at the soul level. So we moved on from Christmas and we come to the springtime and we come to the festival that in Christendom is celebrated as Easter. And we recognize that in many traditions there are different festivals, there are different holidays and different celebrations that take place all around the springtime, because there's something in the air besides the pollen. There's something that is touching our soul. There's something when I look out the window and see how green from week to week, how green the yard is getting, how full the trees are getting, how busy the birds and the animals are getting. There is something that reminds me of renewal. There's something that reminds me of the growth. There's something that reminds me of the deeper mystery of life. You can go out and look at the car and say, look at the mess. Look at the mess the trees made on the car. Look at this green pollen. Now I got to go to the car wash and get it all off. Or we can look at it and say, wow, look at the abundance of life. Look at how life itself is so dedicated to its own renewal that it gives forth in abundance, enough and plenty, as Raymond Charles Barker would say, enough and plenty, more than enough, more than is needed, enough and plenty to pollinate its kind, to ensure its growth, and also to provide for other forms of life. The bees that collect the pollen, turn it into honey. The worms in the ground, the microbes in the ground. It's not just, it doesn't go to waste. We wash it off the car and it goes down the driveway, but it doesn't go to waste. There's something in every bit of life, at every part of the food chain or the chain of life, if you want to call it that. There's something that knows what to do with that pollen. Life is providing for itself. It is renewing itself, and we are part of that. We get to sense that. So the Easter story, as we looked at the story of the Easter story is about death and it is about resurrection. But it's not just about death as a human being and resurrecting as a human being. It is about death to the materialism, to the mortal, to that which exists between the parentheses, and it is being reborn, resurrected into the spiritual, into that which was without beginning and is without end. It is being renewed into the eternal, into the here and the now. So we are spirit, and we come into this human form, and we live our human life, and we go back to spirit, back to the awakening of spirit. Is one way of looking at it. But another way of looking at it, another way of considering what this message is that as the Christmas story is the story of each and every one of us, that there comes a time when there's an awakening, a quickening in our own consciousness, right? Our awareness, our emotions, our thoughts. There's a quickening in the essence of who and what we are that recognizes ourselves as spiritual beings, as an expression of the life of the one who sent us. As that grows within us, as that awareness grows, and we have to feed it and we have to nurture it just like you would have to take care of a baby, there comes a time when we are ready to end our identity as physical only beings. You know, we say it all the time. Well, we're only human. You know, and usually we make that as an excuse when we don't get something done. Well, you know, we're all only human. We just can't do it all. But that's not true. See, it's not true that we are only human. And Don Miguel Ruiz tells us in the Four Agreements, if you don't object to it, you've silently agreed to it. So when you hear somebody say, well, we're only human, if you don't say to yourself, you don't have to tell them, but if you don't say to yourself, well, that's not true, that's just an expression, and you're silently buying into this idea that we're only human. So there comes a time in our growth between the Christmas experience and the Easter experience. There comes a time when we become more aware of our spiritual nature, more in tune with our spiritual nature. If you look at the life of Jesus, the example in the New Testament, we are told some details about his birth in the Christmas narratives. And not all the Gospels have a Christmas narrative, right? Only a couple. But we're told some details of his birth. And we're told that, you know, Joseph and Mary take him off to Egypt to protect him from Herod. And when it's safe, after Herod dies and his son, who is also Herod, takes over, they come back. And then we don't hear much until he's 12. And at the age of 12, we find him in the temple, and he's reading the scriptures, and he's engaging in debate with the learned men of the temple. And we're told that he then left there, and he continued to increase in wisdom and understanding until his public ministry started, which in the way that the Bible, the New Testament tells the story, is with the baptism by John the Baptist. So we have this period of time. We have this period of time where this Christ consciousness is growing. This Christ consciousness is sprouting. It is developing. It is doing so in private, in Egypt. It is doing so in secret. It is kind of taking place until it comes to the point where it starts to blossom. The blossom really starts to show. This is the story of you and I. This is the story of the growth of our soul. And comes the time then when we are ready to cast off our identity with the mortal, to cast off our identity with the flesh, to die to the flesh, to allow the old Adam, Adam means man of the earth or clay man, to allow the old Adam to die so that the new Adam might be reborn. And what this rebirth is this is a rebirth, not kind of a repeating or a reincarnation of our physical existence, but this is a resurrection into our spiritual nature. Stepping more fully into our spiritual nature. Stop living life as a human. Start living life as a spiritual being. So Goldsmith gives us some examples in his works, and we used to use similar examples when we were teaching classes on treatment. You know, let's say you wanted to go next year. You want to go to the retreat out on the West Coast. We used to have the retreats at the Asilomar Conference Center. They may still have some, I don't know. But let's say you wanted to do that. You wanted to go out to California. You wanted to go on to a religious retreat. Now, the human way of doing that is you figure out how many frequent flyer miles you have. You figure out how much money you're going to need. What is it going to cost you for the retreat? How much it's going to cost you to eat? Are you going to have to rent a car, take a bus? You're going to do a project plan on this thing. You know, you're going to lay it out. You're going to figure it out from beginning to end. You're going to figure out how much money you need. And then you're going to try to to figure out where you're going to get the money from. Do you have that much money in your bank account? Do you need to work overtime? We say, well, I need this much money, and that's so many hours of overtime. If I work this many hours of overtime a week, then I'll have enough money. And again, we're kind of we're figuring out how we are going to manage this whole project. It's a human project that we're managing for our spiritual growth to get to the retreat. And if we step back away from that and say, well, that's the way I did it when I was a human being, when I completely identified with myself as a human being, that's the way I did it. But this is a spiritual universe that we live in. And there's another way to do this. So rather than trying to figure out, how much is it going to cost and how many hours of overtime am I, the human being, going to have to work, what we do is we start by understanding what this experience means to us in terms of spiritual growth. This is the experience that we wish to have. We wish to deepen our awareness of our spiritual nature. We wish to bring our conscious awareness closer to God. We focus on those things. And then we recognize that Spirit has already provided, God has already provided everything that is necessary. Everything that is necessary for us to discover it within us. As it has provided everything necessary for the trees to sprout, for the birds to nest and to grow their young, everything that is appropriate has already been provided. So instead of trying to micromanage and figure this all out intellectually and with our ego, what we do is we conduct our business in secret, in Egypt, in biblical terms, we go within. And we recognize that this event that we want to go to, that we desire to go there because we desire to know more of God, to experience more of God, to express more of God, that everything that is required has already been provided, and that whatever we need for that experience has already been provided. Whether it be actually that particular retreat or not, it doesn't matter. It's the experience that we want. Right? And then we allow Spirit to guide us, to show us the way, to show us where the money is, to show us the ways and means. Once heard a preacher say, "Make God your ways and means committee." But there's a danger in that sometimes we can get into the mode of thinking, well, my spiritual nature is a tool for me to use to be a better human being, to have a better human experience. To try to use our spiritual practice to get a better job and a better house and all those kind of things. And what we want to come to realize is that none of those things matter. None of the material things matter. They're all turning to dust. Every bit of it's turning to dust. The bodies that we have are turning to dust. Right? The buildings that we live in are turning to dust. The companies that we work for are turning to dust. What matters is growing in our spiritual consciousness. So we kind of come to an understanding, we come to a realization then that even though I am here on this planet, and even though I am having this physical experience as a human being, that is not my true nature. That is not my true nature. And I'm not here to accomplish, to win. I scroll through my Facebook feed and there's so many memes that people are posting about success or failure or winning or losing or getting up again. And it's all about competing and winning. And life's not a competition. Life's not a competitive sport. It's not a spectator sport, but it's not a competitive sport. It's an experience for us to have. It's an experience for us to be while we are here. So we come to ask ourselves, who am I? An individualized expression of the divine. a soul that God has created out of itself. And why am I here? I am here. I am here to discover more of that. I am here to be on a spiritual path. And each of us is on a different path. Some of the paths look the same. It looks like we might be walking along the paths together. And we are for a time. But at times the paths diverge and then the paths come back together, you know. It's like the trails going up the mountain. They all lead to the top. We are all on this spiritual path, but why are we on a spiritual path? And we are on a spiritual path to develop God consciousness. This is the way Goldsmith puts it. And he defines that. He defines God consciousness as realizing. And what he means by realizing is experiencing, not saying, well, I understand, but experiencing. So the Buddhists talk about three levels of knowing. And again, that falls into one of the three levels that I keep talking about. First level of knowing is somebody told you, you read it in a book. You know. So you read a book and it says, you know, Columbus discovered America in 1492. And you read that and you memorize that, and the test comes along and it says, when did Columbus discover America? And you circle the letter C because C says 1492. That's one level of knowing. Memorization. Maybe 6 months later you've completely forgotten it. Did you really know it? Well, you retained a fact for a little while. Second level of knowing is kind of really processing the information, really taking information and working it around and coming to some type of an intellectual understanding. How does that relate to previous things that I have known? You know, how might it relate to other things that I have known? Well, they say Columbus discovered America, but you know, were there other people here earlier? You know, there's Viking settlements up in Newfoundland and Labrador. They found Viking ships. Archaeologists found them down in Mississippi or Alabama, someplace. I think it was Alabama or Mobile. So we start to take these things and we start to put them into a different context. You know, were the Chinese explorers really off the coast of California? You know, 1,000 years before Columbus or not? The point is we take the information and we weigh it, we evaluate it, we roll it around, we kind of process it, and in doing so we come to a different level of knowing than just memorizing, you know, in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But then the third level of knowing is the realization. We become it. We are it. We can simply do it. We know it. It is an expression of who and what we are. It is such an ingrained part of us. We have the experience of it. Perhaps a better example than Columbus is learning how to drive a car. You can read a manual about the car that tells you how to drive the car. You can relate it to other things that you have done or driven, you know, perhaps a motorcycle, perhaps a lawnmower, perhaps a boat, all these different things. But there comes a time when you actually drive. And when you're first driving, it's a little bit awkward, you know, you're a little bit nervous, all those kind of things. But then after a while, you just drive. You have internalized it. It has become a part of you. So we want to take this idea that we are spiritual beings on a spiritual path, that we have come here because it is the perfect place. It is the perfect place. It is the perfect time in the evolution of our own soul. It is the perfect time and place for us to be here, to experience the presence and the activity of God in this environment, in this life, in this sprouting of life all around us, in the miracles that we see every day. So our purpose then is to develop God consciousness, spiritual realization, who we are, why we are here. And where we are going is as we are going into a deeper awareness every day, a deeper awareness of the presence of God, of the activity of God, of the magnificence of what God is, into deeper and deeper spiritualization. And that will be something that we will be doing forever and forever and forever. As when we leave this parenthesis, we probably go into another parenthesis somewhere. Another experience ideally suited for the evolution of our soul, for the growth. And this is most important that we kind of get this, because so many times when we were children growing up, we kind of were given the idea that something happens along the way, and once that happens, boom, we are suddenly spiritual beings, and we are fully realized and fully awakened. I call it the fairy godmother theology. And it's kind of like somebody waves a magic wand over you, and poof, you are now a fully enlightened spiritual being. You die, you go to heaven, you're a fully enlightened spiritual being. Jesus died on the cross, and he resurrected on Sunday, and he was a fully enlightened spiritual being. And yet, there's if we look at what's in the New Testament, there's a little bit of scripture in there that has caused a great deal of discussion amongst the theologians. Some of the scriptures have Mary Magdalene as being the first person to come upon Jesus after the resurrection. And then later scriptures kind of changed that, and they made Peter to be the first person to come upon him. As the early church evolved, and as Peter emerged as one of the primary figures, and perhaps in the effort to kind of downplay the role of women and the supremacy of men, and all these different speculations as to why this would be, but nevertheless, one scripture has Mary Magdalene being the first coming to Jesus, and she doesn't recognize him at first. She thinks he's the gardener because he's dressed in kind of a different clothes, kind of like men working in their t-shirts. You're out in the sun and you're working in your t-shirt. That's kind of the way the gardeners worked. She didn't recognize Jesus at first, and then she saw who he was, and he said to her, he said, "Don't touch me. Don't touch me. I have not yet ascended. Go and tell the others. Go and tell the others." And this leads to a great deal of speculation. People say, well, why did he tell her not to touch him? What was going on there? Later on, he let Thomas touch him. He told Thomas, go ahead and put your fingers in the wounds, so you know it's me. So there's all kinds of discussion about this, and you're going to have to, if you're interested, you're going to have to work it out on your own. You're going to have to go through that and kind of figure out, well, what does that mean? What are all these different explanations? And what I take away from it, and it's just what I take away from it, you don't have to accept it as yours. I want you to work with it. Is that perhaps he was still in the process of fully awakening to his spiritual nature. He had come to the point that we all must come to at some part in our lives. We come to the point where we have to say, I am not a physical being only. I am not a human being only. I am not only human. And I no longer want to do things the old way. I no longer want to do things the human way. I want to explore my spiritual nature. I want to explore my spirituality, and I want to see everything as it is in spiritual truth. I want to die to the old. I want to be born again in the new. I want to be resurrected into the spiritual. And we do this, you and I, as we grow, we do this. We go to this point and we say, I'm ready. I'm ready to let go of the old. I am ready to turn away from the physical, to turn away from the material, to turn away from the old ways of doing things, and I am ready to grow in my spirituality. I am ready to grow in my spiritual nature. And it's kind of like we expect it to, poof, okay, because we've said that, boom, the magic wand should come out of somebody's pocket. And here we are going to be fully enlightened, fully ascended spiritual beings. But it doesn't usually happen that way. There's a process involved. See, there's time involved, or the illusion of time existing in the parentheses. There's time involved. And there are things that we must do to continue to grow. And sometimes we take 2 steps forward and we take a step back. We take 2 steps forward, we take a step back. We take 2 steps forward and something happens to frighten us and we go back to our old way of being and thinking. We used to talk about change in the seminars. And sometimes people get excited about the idea of change, but it's like going down the river with 1 foot in each canoe. And you're going down the river and you kind of lean into the new canoe, which is the canoe of change, and saying, oh, this is pretty good, I really like this, but I'm holding on to the old. I'm holding on to the old way just in case. I'm going to keep myself current in the old ways of thinking and believing. And you can do that for a while until you come to a rock in the middle of the stream, and then you got to make up your mind. And what happens to a lot of us is we do that, and when we come to a challenge, a rock in the middle of the stream, we go back to the old way, because the old way is more familiar. We go back to the human way. So Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us that what we must do is we must recognize ourselves as spiritual beings, and that doesn't mean that we just stop doing everything that we're doing, quit our job, sell our house, all of that, and say, okay, God, provide for me. She said, what we do is we do our practice every day, and we swing the hammer that we have until God takes it from our hand. Continue doing what you're doing, but do it with a different mindset. Do it with the knowledge that this is something that is in the process of passing. This is only temporary. It is only leaving. So then what happens is that our life, our entire life becomes our spiritual practice, right? And I want you to consider that growing in spiritual consciousness, growing in a deeper realization of the presence and the activity of God all around is like any other art, and it requires practice. You can imagine what it would be like if musicians didn't practice. I remember listening to an interview with one of my favorite artists, Linda Ronstadt, and they were talking to her as if her talent just happened, that she started singing as a child of 5 years old, and by the time she was 16, she had her garage band, and then by the time she was 17 or 18, she was with the Stone Ponies and on her way to stardom. And Linda Ronstadt said, "Oh no, it wasn't easy." She says it was practice. She says it was work. She said, I sang 8 hours a day, whether I had a performance that night or not. I sang 8 hours a day just to exercise my voice, just to learn control, just to learn how to do different things. She said, I was singing professionally and making a living as a singer for over 10 years before I could finally get my voice to do everything that I wanted it to do. See, she was doing that in secret. She was doing it in silence. She was doing it in the privacy of her own consciousness, and everybody didn't see that. All they could see was the successful singer, and it must have come easy to her. Jesus was practicing for 30 years. You and I must practice every day. So every day when the clock goes off, we can start by recognizing that this day is the activity of God. I love the saying from the Dalai Lama, the quote from the Dalai Lama, I have woken up, I have received the precious gift of human life for another day. And I shall not waste it. I will see the goodness in everything. I will see the love in everyone. I will will see the Spirit moving through everyone. And before we begin our activities of the day, before we jump into our routine and go run off to work and take the kids to school and do all the other things that we have to do, we can stop and we can bless the day. We can set our intention for the day. We can recognize that this is the day the Lord has made. We shall rejoice. We shall be glad in it. To recognize that every person we will come in contact with today is an expression of God. To recognize that every driver I meet on the road is an expression of God, that my way is made straight. Right? Divine love has gone before me. Somewhere in the scripture says the angels had gone before me and made my crooked ways, or made the crooked ways straight. But instead of jumping up and jumping into life and taking a breath and living life another day as only human, let's make our day totally spiritual. You have a meeting at work before you go into the conference room. Stop and recognize that each and every person that's going to be in that room in truth is an individualized expression of God. And no matter how they conduct themselves in the meeting, you will relate to them at that level. That doesn't mean that you run into the conference room at work and start hugging everybody like you do the people at church. But it means that as you're sitting in your meeting, you are blessing each one. You are recognizing the presence within each and every one. And recognize that no matter how they express their ideas, even if their ideas come across as being barbed or sarcastic or negative, that they are just simply expressing to the best of their ability at that time. When we sit down to eat, can we recognize the meal that we eat as a blessing of God, a blessing and activity of God, that the presence of the divine is right here on this plate of food? One form of grace is as we thank God for the gifts that God has given to us, and that is good as it goes. I think a deeper form is to recognize that this food is the very presence of the divine, that the plants and the animals that provide the food are divine ideas in action, that the ear of corn and the tomato and the cucumber are all miracles in their own right, that each and every person who touched the food as it was planted, as it was harvested, as it was processed, as it was trucked, as it was shelved, as it was checked out of the store, each and every person involved is an expression of God. And this bowl of cereal that I had this morning is not just a bowl of cereal, but it is a very affirmation of the divine activity in my life. Can I take time several times a day to just pause and to remember some spiritual truth? God is good. God is love. God is all there is. To take our favorite affirmation or our favorite line of scripture and just remind ourselves of it, even if it's only for a moment, even if it's just between phone calls or between seeing clients or calling on customers for sales calls. Can we stop? Can we get in a car and stop at a red light and recognize that God is all there is? God is good. And what I'm saying is that we develop a practice. We develop a practice of consciously recognizing the presence and the activity of God. That we consciously develop the attitude that says, I will do everything that I must do from now on from my spiritual nature first and not my human nature first. And particularly when times get tough or they get scary or there's some type of a challenge in our life, can we think of the Spirit first and not after? You know, a lot of times prayer becomes an afterthought. Well, nothing else worked, so now let's try prayer. Let's make prayer, let's make treatment, let's make meditation our first step. So really what we're being invited to do, and what I'm inviting us all to do at this time of renewal, is to renew our commitment to sprouting now. Not just to renew our commitment to the growth, but now we want to live it. Now we want to have the fruits come forth. Now we want to see the things come into our life that are the results of our dedication to our practice. Yes, things should get better. Prosperity should flow. Health should increase. All of these things should be better. But that is not the purpose of our spiritual practice. And those are the signs following, as Goldsmith would put it. Those are the fruits. Right? They asked Jesus, well, how do we know people say they're with you? How do we know? And he says, by their fruits. Are there signs following? Our purpose for our spiritual practice is simply to know God. Simply to know God. That is it. That is it. If we have any other intention, then we're kind of delaying our growth. I only want thee. I ask nothing of thee, not even thy love. I only want thee. So this year, as we go through another year of growth together, another year, let's sprout. Let's sprout a little bit more. Let's grow in our spiritual nature a little bit more. Let's not only renew our commitment, but let's actually renew our practice. Let's put forward the growth, the shoots, the new growth, the new branches. Let's make this the year that we fully step into the expression of our spiritual nature. If we take 2 steps forward and take a step back, we take 2 steps forward again. But we don't take a step back and stop. We keep going, we keep going, we keep going, like the little ever-ready bunny. Divine love has created each and every one of us out of itself. It has left us alone to make the discovery that we would, in essence, come home. And we would come home as unique, individualized expressions of God. That we would each see it a different way, a different aspect of it. We would each express it differently, like there's no 2 snowflakes alike. We would each express the life of the one who sent us in some unique and wonderful way. And in so doing, we would develop a unique and wonderful understanding of what God is and what God as us is. Who are we? Unique, individualized expressions of God. Why are we here? To develop God consciousness, a deeper awareness, a deeper realization of the experience of the presence of God. Ernest Holmes called it a conscious awareness of our contact with the divine presence within. And where are we going? We're going nowhere. Because we're going everywhere. We are going deeper and deeper into consciousness, which is fathomless, which has no beginning, which has no end, which is only the eternal now that has you and I as its expression. Perhaps we should stop and hear the words spoken to us. This is my beloved, in whom I am well pleased. You are the beloved. Go forward this week, I invite you to a deeper, deeper experience of God. That is why you are here. And so it is.